You're unconscious, or you
Okay.
may be clinically dead with absent heartbeat.
Okay.
Now, at that time, it should be impossible to have any lucid conscious remembrance, and yet people do have that remembrance at that time. She had that out-of-body experience, consciousness above her body, saw her body lying on the ground, saw the horse heading back to home, but then her consciousness went to where she had started prior to her journey, the barn, and she was able to hear other people talking, aware of what they were saying, doing. They didn't know that she was fighting for her life over a mile away.
So what happens when we die? Is it just complete blackness? If we really did come from nothing, then when we die, it's just going to be nothing. We just stop existing. But if you believe that there is a creator, there's evidence among many other things. But today, we're going to talk about near-death experiences, or NDEs. Now, Dr. Jeffrey Long is the leading researcher on the near-death experiences. As a radiation oncologist and founder of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, he's analyzed thousands of NDEs from people all over the world. What he's found is that even when the brain shouldn't be functioning, people report vivid, life-changing experiences. Check this out.
You're unconscious, or you
Okay.
may be clinically dead with absent heartbeat.
Okay.
Now, at that time, it should be impossible to have any lucid conscious remembrance, and yet people do have that remembrance at that time, and that's the experience part of a near-death experience.
Okay. And why is it at that time that you shouldn't be able to have any lucid like brain activity? Why is that?
Sure. Let's talk about what happens to the brain after a cardiac arrest, which means the heart stops beating.
Okay.
The moment the heart stops beating, Theo, obviously, blood immediately stops flowing to the brain. 10 to 20 seconds after that event, the EEG, which is electroencephalogram, a measure of brain electrical activity,
Okay.
goes absolutely flat. There's no measurable cortical brain activity.
20 seconds after the heart stops.
After the heart stop and after blood stops going to the brain. It should
Okay.
be impossible to have any remembrance at that time, let alone the highly lucid and organized near-death experience.
So Dr. Jeffrey Long explains that during an NDE, people experience consciousness even when their brain shouldn't be functioning. Once our heart stops pumping blood and we're clinically dead, there's no way for our brain to operate. I mean, seriously, imagine being 30 seconds away from dying. Your breathing slows down, your eyes close, and you're expecting to stop existing in just a few more seconds. I can't imagine the feeling of despair in those final moments without expecting anything afterward. But if these NDEs are real, how do we know the evidence is sufficient?
Right off the bat, I realized there was overwhelming consistency even in the first few dozen near-death experiences I saw. Everything I knew as a physician told me, this is not possible. You can't have highly lucid, conscious experiences when you're unconscious or clinically dead. And yet here, the very first few dozens of people sharing with me very clearly, and what was very impressive is the remarkable consistency of the elements they were describing. What happened during the experience, the elements, or if you will, characteristics.
Okay.
Not only were they very consistently seen across many, many near-death experiences, but they typically occurred in a very consistent and logical order. This is nothing like dreams or hallucinations or any other type of pathologically altered consciousness. I realized very, very quickly, and as I was to learn even more and more with it, got more and more experiences shared with me, near-death experiences are, in a word, real.
Yeah. What were some of the things that led you to believe that they were real?
Oh, absolutely. The overwhelming consistency. Now, while no two near-death experiences are the same, if you study a lot of them, and Theo, I've studied over 4,000.
Oh, wow.
So with that huge data
Really
set, I
loitering
and
around
other,
there.
yeah, it's kept me busy. It's my second full-time job.
Yeah, dude, wow. St. Peter over here
well,
milling around.
It's tough to be a full-time doctor, which I'm trying to do while doing that as my other full-time job. But what I have observed, and other near-death experience researchers see, is that very consistent pattern of what happens when you have a near-death experience. Well, of course, there's that life-threatening event. They're unconscious or clinically dead, no heartbeat. But at that time, a very common first element is what's called an out-of-body experience.
Okay.
Consciousness separates from the physical body and goes above the body. Now, from that vantage point, they can see ongoing earthly events, often including people frantically trying to bring them back to life.
Keep in mind that Jeffrey is highlighting the commonalities between people's descriptions of NDEs. These experiences are remarkably consistent across different individuals.
You know, Theo, we talked earlier about that out-of-body experience where consciousness goes above the body, above the unconscious or comatose physical body below. What I and other researchers have investigated is how accurate are those observations in that out-of-body state. And amazingly, in my study, over 98% of what people are seeing and hearing with their physical body unconscious down below is accurate down to the finest detail. And in fact, they can make these observations in that out-of-body state geographically far from their physical body, far outside of any possible physical sensory awareness. For example...
What do you mean when you say that? Just before you get to the example, like geographic, like what do you, I'm a little, sorry, I got confused there.
Yeah, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
We had one relatively recent near-death experience. Lady was riding a horse and was out, basically breaking in the horse, and the horse threw her off, and she hit her head, very severe head injury. trajectory, immediately unconscious. She had that out-of-body experience, consciousness above her body, saw her body lying on the ground, saw the horse heading back to home, but then her consciousness went to where she had started prior to her journey, the barn, and she was able to hear other people talking, aware of what they were saying, doing. They didn't know that she was fighting for her life over a mile away because they weren't aware of that. They only were aware of that when the horse arrived without her. And again, she was able to see and bring back all that information, verified down to the finest details of what she was seeing. And a mile away, obviously, there's no way you're going to see, hear, or perceive in any way with your normal sensory function.
If you're still skeptical, here's one more, and honestly, it's spine-chilling evidence that there's another realm we can't see or begin to comprehend. I mean, there are things some of us have experienced that no science can explain, when things happen that defy the laws of nature as we understand them.
In fact, we have a survey question, and we asked people, about what they said, what they ultimately decided about the reality of their experience. And in our survey of 834 people that had a near-death experience, where we asked that question, 93.8% said their experience was definitely real. And over, as part of that, they were saying it was more real than anything they'd known in their earthly life. They typically have acceleration of consciousness. Amazingly, the substantial majority, even though they're physically unconscious or clinically dead, are actually thinking, processing at a speed they simply couldn't have done in their earthly life. When they're in that realm, when they're in that beautiful unearthly realm, feeling love and peace beyond anything they knew on their earthly life, that's not unfamiliar. They often say this is a strong sense of their real home and not their earthly life. And that's one reason they want to stay there.
Now you might be wondering, since they've had these experiences, so what did they feel? Does it feel like a dream? I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to think that it feels like a dream. Anything outside of our reality might dismiss them as a dream or hallucinations. However, we must remember the brain stops functioning at this point. So...
But on the other hand, Theo, I studied very young children, age 5 and below. Average age of this study group was 3.5 years old. Now, at that very young age, when they had their near-death experience, they're practically a cultural blank slate. They almost certainly have no formed ideas about religion, the afterlife. They almost certainly have never heard of what near-death experience is or wouldn't understand it if they had. And yet these people statistically had basically exactly the same content, the elements of near-death experience, as older children and adult, which is a very strong line of evidence that pre-existing beliefs don't really lead to people, having a near-death experience or what the content of the near-death experience is.
The fabric of our reality seems to revolve around our consciousness. Philosophers have been trying to explain consciousness for centuries, and quite honestly, we can keep describing what it might be, but here's compelling evidence. People who were clinically dead experienced something that is more real than this. If our consciousness resides in our brain, neurons firing off, then why did these people experience something that feels more vivid? Maybe take a second here and pause this video to think about it. But okay, a skeptical part of me says, well, how about those people who were born blind? It's fascinating to know if they're still blind in the NDE.
I interviewed Vicky. Vicky was born totally blind.
Oh, wow.
To
So she's
her-
really all in.
Oh, to Vicky, vision was unknown and unknowable. I interviewed her, and you simply cannot explain vision, how we see, in terms of the remaining other 4 senses. It's impossible.
yeah, huh?
Vicky was taken to the emergency room, and the first time in her life that she had vision, she was in what we've talked about, that out-of-body experience, consciousness over her body. And it's interesting to understand her first emotional reaction of suddenly having vision, which was unknown and unknown to her. She was actually frightened because the sense of vision was so unfamiliar. She was initially horrified. What is this new sensation? And she had to actually calm down, and then finally correlated. She didn't even know who that was down on the gurney below, but it was only after Vicky correlated the feel of her long hair. Man, I can't do that well because I don't have long hair, but Vicky did. So
You can
she
edit some in if you need it.
She correlated a feel of her long hair. An interesting ring that her father had given her, she only knew by the sense of feel, and now she was seeing it from up above in an out-of-body experience. So when she calmed down, she then had a tunnel experience, had a review of her life, that life review, and went on into those unearthly heavenly realms. Beautiful, highly detailed, and highly visual near-death experience, but with a twist. Theo, her vision, as she was explaining it to me, was what we hear from many people that have near-death experiences. It's so-called 360-degree vision. Amazingly, she's simultaneously understanding vision in front of her, behind her, right, left, up, down. The proper term would actually be like spherical, and that was the vision she knew. So when I told Vicky that those of us in our earthly life have these pie-shaped visual fields because where our eyes are in the skull, Vicky laughed at me. She said that just can't be. She didn't get it, couldn't grasp it, because her whole life experience with vision was that spherical vision.
What we've heard so far are just pure accounts from people who have experienced NDEs. This one in particular is blind, but could see after death in 360-degree vision. All who have experienced NDEs have that same 360-degree vision too, which is remarkable. Now switching gears a little bit, we're going to look at an atheist who had an experience close to dying, Sebastian Junger. I wouldn't dismiss his experience just because he didn't actually die. However, it's still interesting because even Mr. Junger couldn't deny what he felt. He knew that there was something odd. He acknowledges the incredible consistency among people who experience NDE. A large percentage of the time, dying people who report being received by the dead. Sometimes it's a father, sometimes it's a friend who died, sometimes someone they didn't even like very much. But the dead come to receive the dying in the same way his father did. He pointed out that this isn't exactly memory recall or typical hallucinations, but I'm more interested in what he thinks about it. What is his inference as an atheist? Let me guess. Something very scientific.
So to me, that doesn't prove there's a, quote, afterlife, but it raises a legitimate question, like, what is it we're talking about here? And so where I land, and I promise I won't, like, drag us into a long conversation about quantum physics, but, basically the rational, the argument that's both rational and open-minded, and my mind has been enormously opened by this experience, not to God, but to maybe we just don't understand the nature of existence completely, right? It's been open to that. So the rational and open-minded explanation for some of this stuff, if you don't dismiss it as just neurochemistry, and you're not going to go whole hog on, well, God exists, thank hallelujah. If you're not going to do either of those two things, the conversation that I think can be had is maybe there is some sort of post-death existence at the sort of quantum, meaning the subatomic level, that we just don't understand.
Did you catch that? I'm open-minded as long as you don't include God in the conversation. So you're telling me you're so open-minded that you had to exclude God from your choices of what this NDE might be? Of course it's not God. It must be some subatomic quantum mechanical phenomenon. Would you really call that open-minded if you're cherry-picking the possibilities? I mean, I understand that you're not convinced there's a God, but to turn a blind eye is something else. The reason why some keep doing this is because God might be the closest explanation to these NDEs, if they even consider it. But let me introduce you to Jack Symes, who is an atheist as well, but he's very honest about what he thinks about Christians and atheists. I really want you to listen carefully and really consider what he says here.
I think in terms of like philosophical arguments for thinking it's true, like the one you mentioned a moment ago, like where this all came from, like science can't get to that question.
Right.
Like the Kalam cosmological argument in philosophy is really popular. It just goes, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore it needs a cause. And then you do this deduction to figure out what kind of cause that could be, and it would have to be something outside of time and space with the power and knowledge to bring this into being. And that might not be, that might get you all the way to God. That's a really strong reason for believing in God. And the answers the atheists give in place of it are nowhere near as strong. And likewise, like the argument from fine-tuning, which is gaining traction again. The physicist Sir Roger Penrose said that the fundamental laws of nature, like 26 of them, they have to be delicately balanced perfectly to allow planets and intelligent life to form. He calculates that the initial low entropy point of the universe had to be 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123, which means if you sat there writing out that number for the law of entropy and the condition when the universe first started expanding, and you wrote down 1 digit every second, you'd still be writing out that number now. Like that number is so astronomically huge that the odds of us being here are incredible. And when we're thinking of probability theory, if we're looking at the best explanation for that, then I think, those that posit the existence of God have the better hand. Like, I'm not religious, but I think we have to put our hands up and go, no, to those two problems, they've got really strong arguments for believing in God. But, people like Dawkins, people like Hitchens and the like, even Dennett, I think Harris is a little bit more, sympathetic to those arguments than the other three. But, they're not serious about following the arguments. They're not serious about going wherever they take them. Like you say, there is a dogmatism there.
Jack Symes, who is not a Christian, is baffled by where the evidence points, and is disappointed by new atheism's attitude of disregarding it. Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, and other atheists may be good at making some Christians look like buffoons, but all they did was win the argument and disregard the truth. It's akin to a lawyer proving a serial killer not guilty. Yes, you're doing a very good job at dismissing the truth, but at what cost? So after exploring these accounts and perspectives, it seems there's more to consider about consciousness and what happens after death. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, these experiences challenge us to think deeper about our existence. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So thanks for watching, and if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe for more content like this, and see you in the next one.